Okay. Orson Swindle interview, take one.
All right. Pardon me?
You okay?
Yeah.
Something fell over.
No, this is me clanking around.
If you trip, you could do major damage. You could-
And I know the guy who owns all this equipment, me. So, Orson, I can't even tell you what a delight it is to meet you, and thank you so much for your contributions you've
My
already
pleasure.
given. And I was reading from Honor Bound last night, the big thick
Mhm.
book, and
With all the details. It's
Yeah.
loaded with details.
yeah, and details I'm sure in some ways you'd rather forget. Yeah.
Let's level your camera.
Oh, it's not level.
Not quite. Sorry to interrupt you.
Sorry. Oh, Orson, we got one little technical change.
I'm trying to get my light to work. For some reason it's not working. Can you see it? Busted unbudged. Yeah. I just don't want to roll forever with the box. Top level. All right, let me check your framing again.
You thought I was leaving?
But no, don't go.
How's that?
Not now.
A bit more head movement, say. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Marlene is so lovely. Oh my
What
gosh.
Mike's doing?
Marlene baked cookies.
Mike's due in at 10.
He's doing what?
Mike's due in at 10.
Can you step back a little bit, Carrie?
I think at
11,
11, sir.
Well, actually 11:30, but he said he's coming early.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I've got this as wide as it can possibly be.
Okay. And you're not seeing the black, and you're not seeing the reflections.
Trimming right on the edges of it.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, sir.
As I was saying, one of the differences between this project and I know you've been interviewed many times, as have many of your former fellow
Mhm.
POWs. And the audience for this is primarily the military. They want to learn from the brilliant ways in which you all pulled together, you recovered from your shoot downs, the moral abjection of being forced to give more than name, rank, and serial number. And I know that you resisted heroically with every ounce of your being, but still you had to walk that personal walk of regret, and then find in each other the solace and the encouragement and the strength to move forward as the true men that you are, unbowed by the wrongdoing that was happening against you. So I personally, as an American citizen and as a human being, want to thank you for the way you've pioneered for me and others of many, many things.
Thank you.
Unlike a lot of what the civilian focus is, I often think that there's a kind of almost voyeuristic fascination with the torture. And then you were not the first men in the world to be tortured. That is not what makes you singular. What makes you singular is the way that you met that together as a group, as leaders, as military men. And that's where the military can learn so much from you. So I certainly don't want to shy away from, stories of pain. But at the same time, I don't think of your story as a story of pain. I think it is a story of recovery and the triumph over pain. So that's more the focus of where we are looking. But I'm not saying there's any subjects off limits. I'm just saying that our fascination is with you as military men, as leaders, as human beings.
Well, as I mentioned to you day before yesterday, I guess it was, that we all of us are giving these talks, and people are just fascinated by the story, but they're mostly fascinated by the hardship. And they think we were great. And I said, well, we were. We did good. We hung in there probably as well as anybody could on the circumstances. I said, but the real story It's what we did with our lives when we came home. And I rattle off, we got authors, poets, doctors, lawyers. I said, I'll always make a comment. I said, we're not too proud of the lawyers, but we have, you know, airline pilots and so forth. And I said, that's the lesson of it all. You get up and keep going.
And that's what's so important for the military today, because so many of our young people are coming back from the fields of conflict confused and troubled, and reintegration into society, reintegration into their families. We need to learn from you, because the metrics that the Navy has discovered in the testing that you do in Pensacola every year they literally cannot account for them. You men who went through so much stripped from you, so much taken from you, are healthier, happier, more well-adjusted than the control group by a large margin. It's an over 39% PTSD rate in the control group, and in the former POWs, it's under 4%. That's a startling, remarkable statistic.
That is,
So
statistically, that's pretty huge.
yes. So we're here to learn from you. So to start off, I'd like to ask you a little bit about, was there a military influence in your background that moved you toward joining the military in the beginning?
Well, only that I grew up during World War II, and you know, everybody was involved in that, as I think I mentioned in an earlier conversation. And so I had a great respect for the military, but never thought about a career in the military. And I went off to Georgia Tech, and I had my father, not a minor thing, but my father was a Marine. He just joined as a 27-year-old enlisted guy. And I can imagine, having all the books I've read, the youngsters all in the units always called the older guys who were 24, 25 pops or something like that. So I suspect at 27, he probably had that kind of a moniker that followed him around. But he got out after the war, but he made the landing of Iwo Jima and went through that. And so I knew that, and I followed the war as much as a kid who's 7, 8, 9 years old followed something like that. But they always had the situational maps on the front of the papers every day, the front lines and the enemy and so forth. Little did I know I'd be involved in a war where there were no front lines. But I went off to Georgia Tech. I did not excel as a student because I didn't study, and it wasn't that hard. I got through without studying, so that gives you an idea. But I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I didn't like ROTC. It was mandatory back in those days. You had to take 2 years of it. I didn't like that. But I had two fraternity brothers who were 2 years ahead of me, who were Naval ROTC, Marine option, and I really liked these two guys. They were great guys, and we were friends for an awful long time. One of them is still living today, and we communicate frequently. But I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I left Tech. I had no idea. I just wasn't thinking maturely. And knowing them, I heard about the Marine PLC program, so I said, why not? I don't have anything else in mind to do, so I joined up in that, and it's a rigorous bit of training up at Quantico, 2 summers, 6 weeks each summer. And you go up there, and the whole purpose was to grind you down and see if they could make you quit. And that's a challenge to me. I don't like to quit. But I made lifelong friends in that process and went in the Marine Corps. No intention of career. Had wanted to fly, but my wife at that time had no interest in whatsoever in that. And I was assigned initially to a Marine Air Base. Marine Corps Air Station, Beaufort, South Carolina, where all my friends and neighbors were flying airplanes, and I said, I got to do that too. So that's how I got into aviation.
Great. Just so that I have it on camera, if you could, sir, state your name, your rank upon retirement, and where you're from. I believe it's Georgia.
Okay, my name is Orson Swindle. That's O-R-S-O-N. S-W-I-N-D-L-E. I always say Orson as in Wells and Swindle as in crook. If you can't remember that, you're lost. I was born in a little town of Thomasville, Georgia, and grew up, that was essentially for medical purposes, and I grew up in Camilla, Georgia, a little small rural town of about 2,500 people at the time. And what was your other question?
Your rank on
Oh, I was a lieutenant colonel. That's the least important of any of what I just said.
Okay. Let's fast forward, sir, to the carrier you were working off of. Were you flying off a
No,
carrier?
I was flying out of Da Nang.
Out of Da Nang. Let's fast forward to the missions you were flying over North Vietnam and that fateful day in which you were shot down.
Okay, my squadron rotated to Vietnam and got to Da Nang on the 1st of February of 1966, and we immediately were flying missions. I mean, literally, within 24 hours of arriving, we were flying. And I was in VMFAW 235 flying the F-8E Crusader. I flew over the course of about, from 1st of February through the 11th of March, I flew about 204 missions, I think. I was out of my squadron. They were rotating pilots in and out of countries. If the war was going in real soon, they wanted to get everybody a lot of combat time. So unbeknownst to the rest, all of us, we were going to be there a very long time. And I was over air operations at wing headquarters, and I was flying with the squadron before the squadron left country. They were going to be replaced by another squadron, and I knew I wouldn't have a chance to fly anymore. So I think I'd flown 185 missions in the squadron, and then I flew almost 20 more apart from the squadron, or not attached to it, but I could go over and fly with them. And the day I got shot down, the 11th of November of '66, was to be literally the last mission I would fly in Vietnam. The squadron was leaving country. I had no qualifications in other airplanes. Didn't want to pursue that because I didn't have enough time. And so that was going to be my last mission. And I was flying wing on a guy that had been in the squadron before and got back in to go to Japan. And we went up north of the DMZ and a real hot area. They had just shot down 2 Air Force F-4s in the target area. The target was those inevitable trenches. It's amazing how many trenches we bombed, and supply routes and, nice military terms like that. And the guy leading the flight was having a difficult time finding the target. We had an airborne FAC who at this particular time on this mission, we were just a few miles north of the DMZ. He's at 6,000 feet. Normally those guys were at 1,500 feet. So it was hot that day, and he had been there when they'd shot the 2 F-4s down in that target area. And he was trying to mark the target with smoke, but the wind was blowing so badly it was making it difficult for the flight lead to pick it up, and we were orbiting, and I finally said, I've got the target. I'm flying underneath him, of course, in formation, but I happened to see where the rocket hit, and the guy said, that's right on. I said, I've got it. So I immediately set up to roll in, and what I had not realized, because I was flying formation and mainly paying attention to that other airplane a few feet away from me, I had not been looking at the altimeter, and when I said, I'm rolling in, I was too low to roll in because we were dropping 2,000-pound bombs. And so I had to go around, and that's cardinal sin. You don't make 2 passes at anything up there. And I came around, got in my attack mode, and our computers were in our heads and our eyes. We didn't have the sophisticated stuff they have today. And I released the bombs at whatever the altitude, I think it was 4,000 feet, something like that, doing about 450 knots. And started to pull up, and the airplane was jolted, and I took a hit apparently underneath the airplane as best I can determine, and started quickly scanning, and all what I'm about to tell you occurred in about 10 seconds, I think. But the aircraft started vibrating violently, and I'm in a high nose attitude, and I look over, and the hydraulic systems, there were 3 of them. One was to lower the landing gear and raise the wing. The second one was a backup to the flight controls, and the first one was a flight control. Well, PC1, power control 1, went to 0. That means I was running off of 1 flight control system. Then it started going down, And when that happened, the aircraft pitched up very violently. And while I'm trying to cope with that, I don't have any flight control. It pitches over, and I am thrown up into the canopy. Essentially, I'm strapped in, but I'm pressed up against the canopy. And I can't do anything with the stick, but now I'm in a position that I can't eject because I'm up here. So it stabilizes in a very steep nose down attitude. And I try the controls again. I get nothing. I got on the radio and I said, I've been hit. I've lost controls. I'm gonna have to get out. And I ejected, going probably about 450 knots. I was just guessing at that. And I was not very high. It didn't take me long to get to the ground. A lot longer than some guys did. They went out, chute popped, and they hit the ground. But one of my very first concerns when I had the face curtain in my hand is I'm in the chute now, and I looked down and I saw this enormous bunch of folks. Some of them shooting at me, and they've got pitchforks and everything else. And I said, dear God, please take care of Gail and Kevin. And I threw the thing aside. I got the radio, and it wouldn't work, which was nothing new for us. But the second concern I had went back to that. It's amazing I thought about this, but I went back to that transmission on the radio in the airplane. And I'm sure my voice was about 30 octaves higher than it is right now because there was a little bit of a panic button that had been hit. And I worried for 6.5 years about, I hope to God nobody heard that. And when I got home, I discovered in the debriefings that nobody heard it. The radio in the airplane didn't work, I guess. But anyway, that's how I became a POW. I was captured immediately, and that began a very rough initial days in Vietnam.
Those first 39 days are legendary, how hard they were. In brief, could you just describe what you went through?
Well, initially, when I landed, a third concern that pops up, they were aggressively taking off all the flight gear. You know, we're in a torso harness, we got a G suit on, there's straps and buckles all over the place. Not to mention this pistol I had up here. I took that out, but I decided I wasn't shooting anybody from a parachute when they're all aiming rifles at me. That was not going to be a very smart move. But they started cutting these things away with machetes, and I told them back off a little bit and I unbuckle it because I thought they were going to kill me with a knife. But they very quickly, I had fallen in a ditch and I had bummed up my knees a little bit, and they took me into a cave. It was a dug out cave, a bunker-like thing, and they had a square in the middle of it that was probably the size of this rug, maybe a little larger, and it was about 3 or 4 feet deep, and they threw me down into that. And then for the next, this was late afternoon, it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon as I recall, and from that point entering that pit till the next day, they had people from the area coming in, spitting on me, urinating on me, throwing rocks at me, beating me with sticks, and it was a horror thing. And I was in a terrible state of shock, and I kept saying to myself, this can't be happening. There's no way this is happening. You know, you're looking for every way to escape as you can, and mine was mental, but it was quite obvious I was captured. The next 2 or 3 days, I would be interrogated, threats, and then I guess maybe the second or third day when I was not being very cooperative, they said, well, they dragged out the peace propaganda. Remember this, George Bernard Shaw, is that the guy that, he was an anti-war intellectual, if I remember correctly. Is that right? I may have that wrong. Memory fades. But it's saying, you know, it called us war criminals and things like that. They said, now you will answer the questions or you will be punished. And I said, well, I'm not answering questions. So they had 3 Vietnamese come in on either side of me. They put they took parachute riser cord and put a tourniquet above my elbows, both, with a long stringer, you know, 12 feet out. And they sensed that down to the point where I couldn't move my fingers. They'd so compressed the ligaments and whatever makes your fingers move. And they put 3 guys over here, passed their rope to these guys, and these passed theirs. So now they're pulling against me, and my elbows are back like this, and they pull my arms to the point where my forearms were together like this behind me. My hands are up here, and then they wrap those cords around my torso and arms to where I'm just, I can't even, it's sort of, I can't sitting down. I can't show you exactly what it was. I wouldn't want to. And they then took the cords and put them up over a rafter and hoisted me up. Oh, they'd put cords around my thumbs, and then they put those risers over the rafter in this little hut, and then pulled me up off the ground and beat the living hell out of me. And it was painful, certainly shocking, and I do mean in a physical sense. The shock of the pain was just incredible. And they keep saying, "You must talk." And I said, "Not talk." And I don't know how long this went on. It went on as long as I could stand it. And I finally said, "Okay, I'll talk." And they asked me a few test questions. They had found, I guess it was still strapped on my thigh by my clipboard, and it had my unit, and of course that was on a patch above my name, and then the patch. And so they unleashed these tourniquets and quit beating me, and they started, said, "What's your name?" You know, here it is. "What's your squadron?" Here it is, patch over here, wherever it was. And then, "Who's your commanding officer?" And I'm saying, okay, I got to do something here. And I remember in survival school, they made a big point of saying, you got to be careful lying because you always have to remember what you told them. And I said, okay, that's good. I got that. My mind was halfway clear on that. And I said, well, my squadron commander, I gave him the name of Chili Penn. He was my high school football coach. And then I gave the assistant football coach, became the XO. And then I named off all the guys on the team, as many as I could remember as the squadron pilots. And they wrote that stuff down. And I said, I may have found something here. And then they got into what kind of airplanes I'd ever flown. I said, well, you just shot me down on the F-8, and the manual for it's right here on my thigh, so they've got that. What other airplanes? I said, T-34, which is a primary trainer when you start flight school. And that was my introduction the first day. And I immediately suffered the common malady that all of us suffered from. Notwithstanding the fact that I knew I had taken about as much punishment as I could take, I felt terribly guilty. And that guilt follows me even to today. And I think most of the people you've talked to will probably tell you the same thing. And it's not a pleasant thing because you feel like you let down everybody in the world because you weren't John Wayne. You didn't spit in their eye and get away with it. So it's just something that is a part of that environment. And one of the things I know I was on a couple of boards when we came home where we discussed the code of conduct. And right off the bat, I'll tell you, the code of conduct is great. But we offered some minor suggestions. Most of them I can't even remember. They were so minor. But one of them was, you're going to be tortured till you talk. So have a story. And the other one is, you're a human being, and you will be beaten in this round, and you're not to feel guilty about it. It's the best you could do. That's what we asked. And Jim Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale, of course, with his leadership, he made that point so clear in so many ways. So you do the best you can. Each one of us is different, and so that's how we all learn to sort of cope with this feeling of guilt that we let people down. One of my dearest friends, George McKnight, when I finally moved in with 3 guys, Ron Stores and Wes Sherman and George McKnight, I apologized to him. This was 6 months after I'd been captured. We'd been communicating, whispering, and it's the first time I had a chance to face him. And I said, I want to apologize. I know what you've done. You've been here a year longer than me, and you've done great. And I hear from other people what great resistors you are. And I said, I'm not as good as you are. I did this. And George McKnight, who I've loved for this forever, he sort of laughed. He said, Orson, you're looking at the Ernest Hemingway of North Vietnam. He said, when they've got you in the ropes, they've got you, and there's not much you're going to be able to do about it. And he made me feel a little better about myself, but you still have it. It lingers, and you go on.
Just so that we can connect that for those who are listening, complete that thought. Ernest Hemingway was a writer, and he was saying to you, once they got you in the ropes, they're going to force you to write. So if you would repeat that and complete that statement so that the audience can understand.
Well, you know, we suffered from this guilt feeling. I certainly did, and I know most of the people I know did. And when I moved into this cell with Ron Stores and Wes Sherman and George McKnight, first thing I did when I moved in, I said, I got to tell you about me. I've let you down. I yielded. They tortured me, and I broke. And I wrote this propaganda, you know, some dumb statement. And I said, I'm ashamed of it. And I know what great resistors you are. I hear that through other communication with people, and you're examples of great leadership and toughness. And I'm not like you. I didn't measure up. And George McKnight laughed, and he said, you know, Orson, don't sweat it. We have great experience in this. He said, I'm the Ernest Hemingway of North Vietnam. I've written so much of that bullshit. He said, when they've got you in the ropes, they've got you. And you've got to do something to get out of it, because mentally you can't take it.
You know, when I first began to start this project, it became clear to me that the story of the POWs was the story of our country in this era as well. That we went into Vietnam having been victors in the Korean War, having been victors in World War II, and we had risen as a new country, and we felt indomitable. We felt like we were John Wayne, and we could take anything. And then we came up against the Vietnam War, and the country was in turmoil. It was a very unpopular war. There was all of this confusion in Congress and the executive branch. You guys weren't given the go-ahead to conduct war in a way that was efficient, and you know, so there was this tremendous sense of bewilderment and confusion, and we were being defeated in ways that we didn't understand. And I think it's fair to say that the return of the POWs was the only good thing that the government felt they could point to and say, this is our success. So many, many times you were asked to lead, not only each other in this recovery, but also to lead the country in its celebration of itself. And unbeknownst to the country, you were returning wounded heroes as well as good men. You were this feeling that you couldn't have been John Wayne throughout the entire time. And I apologize to ask you this, but I have to say that we need your leadership again. We are, as a country, we are bewildered about how to forgive ourselves for our mistakes, I believe. So it pains me so much, Orson, and I know every single former POW I meet, I see the same pain, that in spite of all of the encouragement you've had, all of the reflection you've had, there is still that pain that says I gave more than name, rank, and serial number. I apologize that pain is in you. I really do, because to me, you are truly a hero. And because you're a human being who rose up as a human being. So thank you, sir. But aside from my personal feelings, many young people coming up today who are our future leaders are not going to go through the crucible of pain that you went through. So we want to try to find out how they can learn from you. So let's start with recovery from failure. There are several ingredients that went on here. One was that you had gone through this horrible experience, but the connection with another individual, when George said that to you, when those men in that, and I've heard this story again and again and again, when finally a POW comes and bears their soul and says, I failed, or I gave up more than I should have, or whatever it is. And there's always someone there who steps up and says what, in effect, those words George spoke to you. Talk to me about recovery from failure for future people in the military. If right now I'm playing this tape for an audience of veterans suffering from PTSD, how do they learn from you? How do they recover from their failures?
Well, I think the camaraderie that we became enmeshed in because of common experience, and that experience was extremely harsh. It's quite a glue to try to think of a way that I can explain this. And a side point, I always considered that our covert communication, which was basically all we had, was our salvation. It was like lifeblood to us. If you didn't communicate, you're going to die. So everybody communicated, and we knew if you got caught communicating, you're going to be tortured, and that might lead into a wholesale purge and all these things, but you communicated. You never stopped communicating, because it's good for you. We know what happened to you. You know what happened to us, and we were talking about everything under the sun, not just what happened to us. But I think the willingness to learn about reality, I mean, we're human beings. We have our own limits. Each one of us is different. We have different thresholds of pain. We have a different threshold of strength when it comes to willpower. You had to come to realize that every single one of us could be taken down, and I mean literally from our ego, and made just a pile of hurt. And we would all, and in fact, I think it was part of their purpose, trying to make us feel guilty, because most of what, I mean, I read Solzhenitsyn's book, Gulag Archipelago, when I came home, and I said, you know, I get the impression in the communist world, the doctrine is all written down and the nouns are just replaced by different languages or different cultures to get the point across. But breaking you down to where you no longer are you, and you have disregarded everything that's inside of you, which you learned from grandmothers and parents and friends and preachers and teachers and coaches and wherever you learned it, reading books. Once they take that away from you, you're dead. They've got you. So we, in our senior leadership, certainly knew better than I was a junior officer, but we all, after we thought about it, came to understand it's extremely important what's inside of us, because that's all we've got. We've got each other and what's in here. And so I think over the course of, in my case, 6 years, and my people I was mostly in prison with, 7 years, 7.5 years, approaching 8 years, we kept dipping into that well of character and integrity and experience and education and reading our history. I am a great believer, if you're an American, you need to know our history. All the warts and freckles. We are a great, incredibly great country. And when we start to feeling, it's very much like the POW thing, when we start to feeling that we aren't worthy, that we're not great, we're heading for doom. And it was the same way in prison. If you didn't understand first, know of, secondly, I guess it'd be the other way around, you know of and then understand what it means to be an American and what your responsibilities are, you're in deep trouble. We occasionally had, I mean, the morale factor was just enormous. And We got no good news for a long time, so it's hard to stay up. And each and every one of us probably at one time just said, God, we're never getting out of this blankety blank place. And, you know, they start feeling sorry for themselves. And some of them come to me if I'm that and say, you can't do that. Don't be doing that. You're affecting everybody in here. And and that gets to the willpower thing that I mentioned a little earlier. You have to, more than a physical strength, you've got to have a mental strength to hold on to your values and your beliefs. Some said, well, this among us said, well, this war is wrong anyway. My comment to him is, we'll talk about it when we get home. Don't ever say that again around here. You know, young captain, I'm saying all these big things to people. But we'll settle those issues later. You don't have that liberty now to disagree. You should have done that before you got your butt shot down. Here, we got one message. We're going to stick together. We're going to return with honor, because that's what Admiral Stockdale told us we were going to do, and he was right. So it's for young officers and enlisted in the military today, if you aren't privileged and fortunate enough to have those qualities inside of you, if you aren't in this game with that as your foundation, and you're serious about fulfilling your obligations to the country, and that's all I'm talking about, the country, and the country, of course, means the people, then you're in the wrong business. Don't be in it because it's fun to fly nice airplanes and somebody else pays for the gas. Or you get to travel, see the world, wear nice looking uniforms. That's not what it's about. It's dedication to a cause. That cause is our country. And you got to stay involved all your life and get everybody you know to be involved in how we are as a country. But because your obligation, if you stay in it and stay with it, is going to be to that country, and you want it to be the best country it can be. And it's up to us. President Reagan was one of my heroes, and he said, you know, this thing of freedom is only about one generation removed from not existing. And that's a very true statement.
I'm just,
I accidentally bumped my mics there.
It's okay, you're forgiven.
we have two different mics on you, so you're always covered.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's going to be a big.
It's okay. We have
You can handle that.
We always have backup.
There's so many things in the statement you just made, so many important themes. I'm going to try to deconstruct a little bit some of the pieces so that young men and women can hear exactly what you're offering them. You make a couple of points here. One is that you plumb the depths of, you have the environment that you're dealing with, whether it's the enemy, the situation, whatever it is. But in addition to that, and you have all the resources that your government has given you, your training, all that other stuff. But that's one piece of what you fight with. The other piece of what you fight with is the principles inside of you that you have made. You have learned and decided were...
You have to fill up that vessel you just described. The vessel is all the outward, obvious things of organization, association, fancy equipment, uniforms, parades. That's just a vessel. You got to put something in the vessel, and that's what's in here.
Beautiful. And
Hey, Patrick,
Yeah.
ask him to pull the back of his shirt down. Can you just lean forward and
My
pull
shirt?
the back?
Yep.
Carrie, yeah, Carrie, could you give us a hand? This is the back of his shirt is coming
It's Carrie's fault.
Yeah, I know.
Can you still see it?
Yeah, just stop. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
we're doing well on exposure, right, Bill?
Oh, yeah, we're doing good.
Okay. We talked about something when I was at your home, we were at your home, and I want to make sure that we get this, both the question and the answer on camera, because I said to you, a lot of young people today, they may not give voice to it, but they look around in the world and they say to themselves, why do I need to be honorable? You know, if I go to Harvard and I want to become a stockbroker, they don't ask me what kind of stockbroker I want to become. They don't say, hey, you know, you can be a Bernie Madoff or you can be, you know, they don't care, you know. But at the academies, they do. They say you need to be an honorable person. And why do I need to be honorable? I'm seeing a lot of successful people who are not honorable. And so, and what you said was, look in the mirror.
That's right.
It's important for me, because we're not going to hear my voice on this, that I get both the question and the answer. So if you could, sir, in your own way, phrase, if I had a young person, if you were talking to a group at the Naval Academy today, and they may not admit it openly, but inside, there's some part of them is saying, why do I have to be honorable? It doesn't seem to make the difference between whether I'm successful or not. But you know why you have to be honorable. You know what that vessel needs in the hard times. So if you could, in your own words, pose both the question and the answer, so I have that on camera, I would really appreciate it, sir.
Well, you know, today's environment is unbelievably different from the one that I grew up as a kid. The way we were taught, the things we respected, our sense of what was our duty and responsibility, and every one of the POWs that I knew well, we were all so much alike, yet we come from such different backgrounds. But we had basically been taught these concepts. Interestingly, one of the things we occupied our time with is memorizing. We had some people that had photographic memories, could remember anything. They remember speeches, and one of the favorite speeches, you may not like General MacArthur because he was a controversial figure, but his farewell address to the students, or to the cadets at West Point, in which he talked of duty, honor, and country. And if you've never heard that, I hope you're being exposed to it, at least through the fine acting of Gregory Peck as General MacArthur. It is the most moving rhetoric I think I've ever heard as it pertains to a profession, and that is the military. And he, in very eloquent terms, encapsulates the tradition, the ethics, the responsibility, the honor, the necessity of being a certain way. And I don't really give a damn how universities want to approach that, because I don't have that much respect for universities anymore. But at the Naval Academy and at West Point and the Air Force Academy and the Coast Guard Academy, and if I've left out anybody, I didn't do that intentionally, you better be like that. Otherwise, you're going to fail. You may not experience the failure, but those that you will be honored to have command over, you will fail them. You have to set that kind of an example. And sometimes it's painful. Jim Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale, paid a dear price for being like that, being a leader, being committed, knowing what his responsibility and duty are. You know, and that's why the simplest way to put it is just look in the mirror. Is that person being the kind of person you apparently aspire to be because you're at the academies? I hope you didn't come here just for the free ride. And by the way, it's not really free. You're here to become something special. And that's what Admiral Stockdale was. That's what General Reisner was. Admiral Denton, or Senator Denton. Robbie Reisner, my God, what an honorable man. They just exuded these qualities. And the simplest way to respond to, why were you that way? When everybody around you and the society as a whole today is not that way, maybe some would say. And the simple answer is, I have to look at myself every day in the mirror. That's why. I don't have to answer to anybody, but I have to answer to myself. And to your own, what Shakespeare line, to thine own self be true. I guess that was Shakespeare. I went to Georgia Tech, so I didn't get much of that. But that's the essence of it.
Stunning. It's just incredible. One of the points you make is that you fight not only for yourself, but for those around you. But you made the point that if you're whining all the time, it's harder for them to get up in the morning and face another day. And you tell the most touching story about this, that followers need leaders and leaders need followers. You tell the most touching story of Admiral Stockdale early on in the incarceration. Could you tell that story, sir?
Well, Admiral Stockdale, or CAG as we called him, Carrier Group Commander, acronyms. We love acronyms. I was captured in November of '66, and around April, May of '67. I'm still solo, not in isolation, because I've learned how to communicate. But I hear about Admiral Stockdale, James Bond Stockdale. When you're mentally desperate, maybe that's the sign the CIA's gonna get us out here or something. You believe anything. But he's been through the grinder, and they've beaten him. I think we heard tapes where he was confessing to having a bad attitude or whatever, some absurd thing. But I'm in this cell by myself, and 2 doors down is empty, and all of a sudden one night they come in and toss somebody in there, and of course the next day the first thing we do is we try to get communications, and I find out it's Jim Stockdale, and he was very quiet. He was our commanding officer, senior ranking officer, and I felt so bad about myself. Here's that pity thing back, guilt. I'm feeling really bad. I'm by myself. I can't talk to anybody about it. And they move in this incredible man 2 doors down. I can't see him. The only thing I ever saw of him, and the whole time I was there until the last few days, was his foot. And his foot was towed in from that shattered leg. And just his presence helped me through tough times, knowing that he'd been through a hell of a lot worse than I had. So fast forward now. Fast forward, I guess is the way to put this.
Well, before you get there, there was a point in that...
We were talking. This cell block had 15 of us maybe, and we're all captains or Navy lieutenants. We're all the same. And we're talking about something. Don't even remember what it was. But anyway, we get to a point of stalemate where we can't decide what the answer to do, or what we should do. And I tell the group, I whisper it. I said, hey guys, give me a little while and I'll ask the old man what we should do. And we went on, and whatever it was, we resolved. And Stockdale did give me an answer when I tried to get him up. He was hard to get up. He'd really been put through the ringer. Well, fast forward to, we're going home, and the Vietnamese have turned this courtyard, big area, where the cell blocks were around it, and walking across, and they'd taken the curtains down that prevented us from seeing anybody, and I'm sort of hanging on the bars, looking at everybody out there and talking to a few people that I did recognize, and across the way comes the most tired looking man I've ever seen in my life, and he's limping, and I know right away who it is. It's Jim Stockdale. And he comes up, and I said, how you doing? I'm talking down from this elevated position. I said, how you doing, CAG? He said, I'm fine. Who are you? I said, I'm Orson Swindle, and I want to thank you. Your very presence saved my life back in 1967. I mentioned the cell block we were in. I said, when you were tossed in there, dumped in there, you had been through so much, and just you being close to me got my mind together and made me realize what my responsibility and duties were, and you saved my life. Certainly saved my pride and honor. He said, that's really interesting, Orson, that you would say that. He said, I remember that very clearly. I had been through the ringer. And as you remember, I wasn't communicating very much. I was just completely beaten down. And to get caught communicating again meant more torture. I didn't want anything to do with that. He said, and I'm sitting there listening to you guys one day whispering during the siesta time, as we called it, when the guards sort of fell asleep outside. You were whispering, and I heard your voice say, hey guys, hold on just a minute. Let me see what the old man thinks we should do. And he said, you saying that reminded me of who I was and what my duties are and what my responsibilities are. You saved my life too. And we were good friends. I met him only after we came home, and we became the best of friends, and he's one of my true heroes, and I credit him with more than any single person, and Lord knows I can give you a list of a bunch that got us through this thing, but he more, I think, than anybody else, because he was the leader. He recognized he was the leader, and he led. He always was leading.
Wow. And so one of the points we're drawing together here, and that's such an incredible story. It's been one of my favorite stories of the whole Vietnam era ever since I first heard of it. To draw it together for young leaders of tomorrow, the point you're making is, in that story, we see that great leadership needs great followership. Great followership needs great leadership. It is a two-way street.
Absolutely.
To be a leader, you have to understand the needs of your men. To be a follower, you have to understand the price of leadership. Can you speak to that?
Well, I think first and foremost, military leadership is why you academy midshipmen and cadets, that's why you exist right now. You're trying to become this. And I strongly believe that there are some people who are just natural born leaders, but they're the small group. The rest of us learn leadership, and we learn it from being smart, learning things, learning history, learning about individuals, learning what they did, how they did in certain circumstances, because I don't think there are any new problems. We just have different faces on them. And you have to recognize that you are the leader or you are one of the followers. And that leader, if you're that person, you've got to be the perfect example almost. And I don't like to use the word perfect because none of us are perfect. But it's just incumbent upon you to set the pattern, to set the bar as high as we can get it. We know where the bar should be. Now can we live up to and get to the top, get over it? And there will be setbacks, and setbacks drag us all down. It's the story I was telling you about Admiral Stockdale telling me, you know, he was so down at that point that he just didn't want to get caught up in a big purge again because he paid a price for it and he needs time to recuperate. But he knew who he was and he knew what he had to do. And we respected him for that, and because of that, he had our essentially total loyalty, and he carried the day. We all came out of that as he set our motto, return with honor. And leadership is, I don't think you learn it out of books really. I think you can study it and you can read about great leaders and what they did in different circumstances. But in my mind, the leaders that I've appreciated, I learned from them by watching them, you know, how they did things, their temperament. And there are all kinds, you know, there's some that just ricochet off the walls, and then there are others that never say a word, but they all have some, incredible spirit inside of them that they know it's their job to lead, and they know that they're responsible for you becoming as good as they are. And I think I mentioned to you, when I think of the people that we had, the leaders we had, and we were a random sample of aviators in Southeast Asia. I don't think those guns knew who they were shooting down. It's just bang, 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 and all of us wound up in this place. And it was a horrible place. And we had the likes of Jim Stockdale and Jerry Denton and Robbie Reisner and Jim Castler and Bud Day and Leo Thorsness and Jim Bell and Ed Schumann. All these people, several Academy graduates in that group I just named, but not all, wound up in the same place in this horrible condition. And it's like God put them there to lead us, to help us get through it all. And every time I think about the quality of people that were there when I got there, and I looked up to as a result of being with them, got to know them, it's just remarkable. And I don't know if that means that if you just take a cross-section of all of us, we have that many good people. I don't think we do. That's not to say these people aren't good people, honorable people, but these were special people for a special circumstance. And they all contributed to all of us as a unit getting home.
The take a real quick look at my. Was it a statement? Hold on 1 second.
Where's your water, Orson? There you have water.
So, there was a statement that CAG put out, unity over self. Talk to me about unity over self.
Well, I think it stems from...
And if you could repeat that statement so that, because they won't hear my voice.
Okay. One of the many things that Admiral Stockdale did was he established a community, if you will, of us. We couldn't see each other. We couldn't talk directly to each other. We tapped through walls and did all these crazy things. And he, because of his intellect and his belief system, knew that we had to be a community. We had to feel an obligation to the guy next to us. That couldn't let him down. He can't let us down. But we also had to have compassion and realize we're all different, and we have different thresholds, and some of us are going to fail quicker than others, but we're all going to get knocked on our butts. But the real essence of the real men of the environment they were in are those who got knocked on their butts. They got up and got back in the ring and kept on fighting. He gave us guidelines. I'm trying to think how best to put this. I can't remember all. He came up with a great acronym that I would be hard pressed to repeat it, but it was a simplification of what our job was. You know, we had to follow the code of conduct. We don't give them propaganda. You know, I think that one it was called KISS, was K-I. It was like, instead of keep it simple, stupid, but it was, you know, you don't back us. That's what it was. And he said, you know, just rules: don't take early release. If you're forced to leave, don't give them any special good poses for the cameras, and you don't be obstinate, because you know you're right on our edge there. And they were guidelines of how we would conduct ourselves. They basically were a reincarnation of the code of conduct in rather a common language. And you couldn't help but be or want to be like Jim Stockdale. He was such an example, and you want to be like him. He made you want to be like him, and not that it's him, It's what we ought to be. We're expected to be this way. That's why I say, if you're at these academies and you're not here to be like Jim Stockdale or be like me, be prettier than me, or be like Robbie Reisner or Wes Sherman or Ron Stores, leave, please. Don't waste the money. We need leaders. We need people who are willing to make the sacrifices. It's a hard life in many ways. But if you're not here with the intention of getting to that level, then get out of here. You're wasting our time. We need to find leaders. I hate to say it so bluntly, but it's so critical. I mean, you know, these days we see commanders at various levels being relieved of command. We see social engineering going on at the academies. For God's sake, you know, the military is not a social experience or experiment. We exist to fight for our country, to protect our country, to keep it as close to the line that our founding fathers dreamed of and hoped for and expressed in marvelous documents. We're not here to change the military. We're here to serve a country. And again, I would say, this is not a social experiment. And those who are making it that way or trying to make it that way are doing grave harm to this country. We need more Jim Stockdales. It's that simple.
Would you like to take a break, sir?
I'm fine.
Use the restroom?
I'm fine.
You
I
sure?
may, is Carrie around here?
I'm right here.
I would appreciate a little bit more water.
Yeah, sure.
In your time out here, have you been hydrating, as we would say out here? Yeah, because you don't know it, and then all of a sudden you know it.
The first couple of days here, we did some scouting. We were climbing the hills, and
Yep.
boy, oh boy. See, I live in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
down at sea level. It kicks your butt for the first
Yeah.
couple of days.
Did you get the sleet? I mean, the hail that we got yesterday?
We heard a thunderstorm.
We heard
did not get
thunderstorm,
hail.
we didn't get hail here.
Well, I'm sitting in the house and getting ready to go over and attend a little party for the girl across the street who's graduated from high school. They went up Red Rocks, and she's got some of her friends there and her parents there and all the neighbors. And I come back to the house, and it's starting to cloud up. I'm looking out at the clouds because it's all coming from up that area. And I'm worried about her, and then it starts raining a little bit, and then it's not raining hard. I go in and I'm doing something, and all of a sudden I hear a big clap of thunder, and I go look out again, and then a whole wave of hail came down. It lasted about 3 minutes, and Angie's plants are out there. Now I go running out, I'm pulling those plants under the shelter. And
It's the great thing about living in the mountains is the
Oh, yeah.
weather that can, let's go
and
ahead.
it was like the crushed ice out of the refrigerator.
It sounds